Hello and welcome to our second pep talk today with Madam Vice President Nancy Shereni, a former, Thunderbird student government individual, and a beautiful person, a beautiful human being. And thank you for being with us today, Nancy.
Thanks for having me.
And today, Nancy, as you saw last video with Solomon, we want you to tell us a little bit more about your history, about the issues and challenges of your country, Zimbabwe, and just for the audience to learn more about you and your background. So why don't we just start with you telling us a little bit more about the history of Zimbabwe, like we said, the issues and challenges in terms of like an economic, political, social sphere.
Zimbabwe was known as the breadbasket of Africa. It was formerly known as Northern Rhodesia, were obviously colonized by the British. In 1980s, when we had gained our independence, and under the rulership of Robert Mugabe, who was the president for 37 years, ended up becoming a dictator in that regard. Zimbabwe suffered in terms of just not just education or educational standards, but our relationship with the West became very difficult. A lot of very educated people, but unemployed, a very high unemployment rate due to the decisions that were made by the government, the fact that there was a lack of management or just corruption within the country. Zimbabwe has high agricultural growth, but vast amount of potential in the country. Unfortunately, people are surviving just by day, kind of hand to mouth, because of the state of the country, and it's very difficult to live. And currently, we don't have our own currency due to all of the failed decision making within the government and so forth. So currently, we use the dollar, for example, and also the South African rand. And so now that Mugabe has resigned, there's the new presidency. There's I wouldn't say a fully new government. This transition is still happening, and the elections to come for an elected president. But there's been quite some turmoil until 2018. And now there's more peace. Now with the new president, he has opened up gates with the West, the Western world. He has changed some of the rules within the Constitution, which has really, we've already seen results. And I think the biggest thing within the communities in Zimbabwe is that he's allowed an open forum of discussion, whereas before nothing was for negotiation, because it was a dictatorship. So now people feel like they are more empowered. They feel like they actually can speak up for who they want to be and like take pride within their country. And so Zimbabwe has been through quite a transition. It's now 2018, and I think we really are just finding our true sense of identity just now. So it's kind of like a lot of people are calling it a new independence all over again, past colonial era, and then being in a dictatorship, and now finally having an opportunity to really be proud of a good country, and seeing those prospects grow, and having that, possibly being the breadbasket of Africa all over again, because there's a vast amount of potential and extremely educated people there as well. So it's kind of like an overview of Zimbabwe. We're hoping that there'll be more millennials that would, go into the governmental space, so that, we're just having a new mentality, a new mindset on and a new mindset on the rules and the Constitution, and just how to lead people would be great, because the older people still think in the same way. So even though there's a new presidency, many people are worried about that the same mindset is still within the government, which makes sense. So yeah, there's a lot of changes to come. I know that there's one female leader who's looking to run for president in one of the parties, which will be interesting. And so this will all happen very soon. Our First Lady, Grace Mugabe, was not the best representation of a First Lady or just a female leader in empowerment by any means. She definitely took advantage of her role. She really leveraged whatever power she thought she had and really didn't look out much for the citizens. So there is definitely prosperity in the future. There's hope for the future now. It's more visible than ever.
That's awesome, man. Thank you for that. Because like, as many other African states, in the continent, they didn't get their independence until the second half of the 20th century, which talks a lot about how this is a country that is starting to develop, they're starting to run, and shows a lot of the issues and challenges that people go through. But just recently, the coup d'etat on Robert Mugabe after 30 years in power, 37, counting if he started in 1980. What are some of the differences that you see between you growing up with his rule and the people now with the new leadership under former VP Emerson Mnangagwa? Mnangagwa, is that how you say it?
Yeah, I think the slight difference would be that when I grew up, Mugabe was still being praised to an extent. I mean, we hadn't felt the heavy presence of his dictatorship, but as I grew older, there was a lot less freedom. I mean, just simply baseless. A small example would be how the police would treat the citizens. They were very ruthless with how they treated citizens. People were put into jail for, minute reasons. Things that didn't really make sense per se because they wanted to be bribed. Just so that the nature of the state was very like survival mode, and it was quite rigorous in that and very conniving. So people sort of like from when Mugabe's rule was over time, now people have been quite ruthless. It's almost like the attitude in the country has been, kind of moved from a very Zimbabweans are very sincere people, but now they've moved to be a very very cunning in some ways, not the entire population, of course, but just the attitude of the country, given the type of situation we're in. But now with Mnangagwa, people have a lot more hope. People seem to be, traveling a lot more in regards to like opening up to new experiences, kind of challenging their views online, on social media, a lot more than they would. An example would be before when people would challenge their views on social media, the former president had said that if anyone does this, then they're going to go to jail, for example. So there really wasn't much freedom of speech. And then now that forum has been opened up, that isn't a thing anymore. So I think the biggest thing I would say is the attitude of Zimbabwe. Zimbabweans are very hardworking people. That's actually a stereotype of theirs, which is, something we're proud of. Very hardworking people, but the means in which that hard work it comes through, it's not so conniving anymore as it is now. We're willing to and have the strength and the hope to work hard so that our country can actually become a better place. Whereas before, that desire had completely gone and it was just survival mode, like hand to mouth, what can I do for myself and my family? Now there's hope and people are ready to strive against Zimbabweans that are overseas, all over the world, like want to come back and want to come help the country because there is that open forum for that, whereas before there wasn't.
Which you mentioned a lot of facts, Nance, that I relate a lot to my country, Mexico, in terms of corruption and survival. Mexico is a country that, as you said, it's very easy to be bribed because people just, don't have the means and the necessary income to provide for their families. And it goes back to, hundreds of years. I feel like many countries around the world having the necessity to just pretty much provide for their kids. And even though Mexico gained their independence way before Zimbabwe, I think there's a lot of like cultural similarities in terms of like challenges.
Right.
But I'm glad to hear that things are slowly changing. It's a process, it's a generational process. So I hope that things get much better in your country. But now, how do you think this new leadership is gonna affect that issue of having a strong leader that will lead them to do the right thing? Obviously, change doesn't happen overnight, but how do you think this new ruler, Mr. Emerson, former VP, is gonna help these, lead these people and open the market so there's more jobs for them to change that culture?
Yeah, so, one basic example would just be making our relationships with Western countries such as Britain and other countries, you know, better, like letting them know our relationship with the global network and so forth, making them know that Zimbabwe is a competitive market as well, opening that up. So something that he did is, I guess an example would be the land, like how the white farmers were told to leave previously. He has now extended the lease per se for what the black people, African Zimbabweans, black Zimbabweans, are allowed 99 years of lease for their land, for example, whereas the white farmers are allowed the same thing now, whereas before the land was taken away, now they've been given back their lands, their rights, their lands. Of course, that's a process, but that's something that he's actively working on now. That's an example, and just within international community in general, you know, he's been talking to the Prime Minister in Britain, and opening that up, you know, and just letting them know that we aren't so hostile against them, and that we do need to trade with these countries, you know, to open up opportunities to begin with for work, and so forth. And then also another example would be even with like the World Bank and all of these other international platforms that we have to that help facilitate or are mediators, like the UN and so forth, mediators for growth in different types of economies within the world. Zimbabwe wasn't part of some of those because of the state of the country, but again, he's been speaking to those leaders and you know, just seeing if we can, you know, be back within that type of economic cycle, and kind of be more involved with what's happening in the international community.
That's awesome, Nance. Thank you for that. That's a great information. And you mentioned that, you know, education used to be very poor. It's still till these days in rural areas, I'm sure, and like in many other African countries. Tell us a little bit more about what's education like in Zimbabwe and around the country, health. Many African countries, especially in Western Africa, also suffer of like poor health facilities and access to education. So how this has a, you know, direct impact in the economy. So what's like in Zimbabwe?
So interestingly enough, though there is, you know, the education in Zimbabwe is interesting because what makes it poor isn't necessarily like the quality of the education. The quality of the education is great. So they're very, I mean, like again, it's very educated people with degrees, and so forth. But I think it's more what makes it poor is that people in some communities, especially in the poor communities, they're struggling to take their children to school, even if it's like $20 a month or whatever the case is. That's very difficult to provide that income. And so what makes it poor is more of the management rather than the quality of the education is great. But the management of that education in terms of, you know, the schools and also just the education department within government in general isn't being managed to the best that it could be. So that's really what makes it. In terms of health, well, in terms of health, I mean, Zimbabwe definitely struggles with its own variables of health, like, you know, we have to deal with AIDS, also there's like the sleeping sickness and so forth. But these are things that are actively being worked on. And in terms of progress, I'm not quite sure. I'd have to honestly look that up and see the progress in terms of the health and like industry in the health ministry in general. But I know that there's a large need for assistance, especially in rural areas. And I know that, you know, like even in the more modern areas, in the CBD and so forth, that it's very difficult to get access to some sort of medicine. So people fly out to South Africa for if they're in critical condition or something, they fly out to South Africa, which is something that my family did for like my small sister who had a hole in her heart. It was a big thing, but we ended up flying to South Africa, and then she got surgery there because they have really good facilities there, and they have some of the best hospitals, you know, in the world as well. So I think that's something to be left aside. And again, I just think it's simply based on management. I think the people themselves are very qualified, like they're, you know, very qualified doctors that could compete with the rest of the world market in terms of health. I just think provision, you know, that's something that's lacking. Accessibility to even generic drugs and that's really expensive for people in rural areas. So really just management, and even just from middle management to overall like governmental management of these systems is what's making them poor, rather than the people themselves.
Which is an eye opener to, compare like the Western world, and especially right here in the United States, on how like people sometimes in different areas happen to complain in terms of like access to education and health, but it's nothing compared to a person that cannot even provide their kids with proper education for $20 a month. It's an eye opener of the issues and struggles that different countries around the world have. So we appreciate you telling us about that, Nance. And how about energy? How's the energy like? What's the energy infrastructure like? And it's obviously it's a very important part of the economy.
Yeah, that is true. I would have to do some more research because personally, I'm not too sure.
But per se, you have good access to electricity.
Yeah. In terms of energy, we have a lot of power outages, plenty. Last week my family told me that a power outage. So that's interesting. I think that's just something they need to work on. If anything, that's between health and providing those resources in terms of energy is one of Zimbabwe's weaker qualities in terms of like just the strength of the country. There's constantly power outages. This is a huge effect in terms of hospitals, and I grew up with a generator in my house ever since. I've always known to have a generator in Zimbabwe because you just can't trust whether there'll be electricity or not.
Utilities.
Right, and I lived in a suburban area, so in the rural areas, there's not access to that stuff unless you have a generator. Not many people do. So that's definitely something the country has to work on. I don't really know what exactly their plans are with that so far, with the new president and stuff, but it's a weaker point within the country's growth.
Which I'm just reading a lot about the energy industry in Africa. I know there's a lot of renewable energy that's going to come to Zimbabwe, so that's gonna help develop the economy, get some jobs. So I'm sure in the next two decades, you're going to see a huge change, especially in rural areas. So I'm glad to see some change there. But now, Nance, let's put politics aside and give us your beautiful smile that you always have and your laugh. And tell us a little bit more about your story, Nance, in Zimbabwe, like some personal experiences that come to your mind, memories with your family, traditions that you would like to share with the people that really identify you with the country of Zimbabwe.
Yeah, sure. So something that's pretty traditional for us, I know for some other families, or that I'm friends with at least in Zimbabwe, is that Christmas for us, we don't do the white Christmas in terms of
no Santa?
No Santa. The one time my parents tried that and it failed miserably. But the effort was recognized and A for effort. But no, so we do we just try to get the whole family together, which is hard enough in itself. Because currently right now my brother's in Sweden, I'm in America. My sister's in South Africa, my mom and my dad are in Zimbabwe. Well, my mom's in Zimbabwe right now, my dad is in Paris. So literally...
Global family, huh?
Yeah, but that's how
a true T-bird.
That's how a lot of the families are now, at least that I'm friends with. But so getting the family together, everyone in one place, is something that we literally plan. At this point, it is just documented. And as a result, I don't think everyone has been in the same place for the past 6 years, honestly, 6 or 7 years. But basically before that, that's how it was. So getting everyone together, doing kind of a family reunion. It was really just over Christmas. Christmas is a huge time. It's massive. And this just goes for Zimbabwe in general. And so I grew up in a Christian background. I'm Christian. And so we would go to church and kind of celebrate Christmas there in the morning. Afterwards at night, do a huge party with the family and just really celebrate being with each other, which is really important. And I loved that dynamic, that it was less about the gifts and more about the people that you're with. So that's just something I grew up with. So during Christmas, I don't really look for the gifts ever. I mean, it's nice receiving something, but I would just much rather have my friends and family, like being with my friends and family. So that's just something that's really, really special, that's like really Zimbabwean, and just something I grew up with. But yeah, I mean, Christmas honestly is just my favorite time. And now we've made the intentional decision to go to, like, for example, this Christmas, to go back to Zimbabwe and
awesome.
meet in Zimbabwe, because usually we pick somewhere in the world to meet, but we just want to go home, just go back to Zimbabwe and meet there and just gather to be with family and friends.
And it's always good to be home, Nancy. So it talks a little bit more about the person that Nancy is. Nancy, provided us with so many good memories, with so many laughs, with tears, and with dances. And we love to dance. She's a great dancer, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
But thank you for all this, Nancy. Obviously, this is going to be very insightful for the audience. Thank you for sharing not only about your history, but about your personal background. We appreciate you doing this. And as always, we love you, Nancy, and thank you for doing everything.
Thank you for this opportunity
that you've done for us at Thunderbird.
I appreciate it.
You're the best.